Good morning. Thank you all very much for coming out today to our seminar on the value of the proposition of the communications unit. My name is Justin Turner. I'm the statewide interoperability coordinator for Arizona, and I manage the Public Safety Interoperable Communications Office. Our office is responsible for advancing interoperable communications here in Arizona in partnership with all of our stakeholders from the law enforcement, fire, medical community, and public safety and public service community. We very much appreciate you coming out here for this. This is not, if you're here to learn about that, that one weird trick to improve communications on an operation, this is not that kind of a workshop. Instead, we have some of the best folks from around the country today to really talk about how comms fits into the overall operational picture, whether it's a small event or some large pre-planned event, or even the kind of rolling disaster with incidents within an incident. Before we get going, though, and we've got a great lineup of speakers that we'll introduce as we get through. We'll also have a Q&A panel discussion at the end. In your package, you should have a small little sheet of paper to write questions down on. And for the folks that are joining us on the webinar, you'll be able to type your questions into the chat box. Once there'll be a break about 45 minutes in. If you have any questions at that time, go ahead and hand it to one of the PSIC office staff members. We'll take that, and then we'll do that again right before the panel discussion. And that way we can kind of keep going as we're going through. But if you do have questions while you're listening to any of the presentations, make sure to write those down so that we can address them at the end. I should also mention, through the doors there are the fire extinguishers are to the right there or all the way down the hallway at the end. We also have bathrooms to the left as you go out to just about 10 yards down the hallway. So if you need to use the restrooms, there's also water fountains over there. So with that, this is kind of our agenda today. I'm going to go through just a brief overview of the communications unit for those who aren't familiar with it, kind of talk about some of the roles and responsibilities of the different people in the communications unit. Then Lieutenant Brian Lee with the Phoenix Police Department is going to speak from his perspective on how the value that COML brings to event planning and emergency response. We'll take a 15-minute break, and then Captain Mike Worrell with Phoenix Fire Department is going to talk about the Granite Mountain Memorial and all the communications challenges that he faced as the COML for the memorial after the Yarnell disaster. And then we have Lieutenant Mark Cady with Worcester Fire Department, and he's going to speak as his perspective as one of the COMTs deployed during Superstorm Sandy and some of the lessons learned from responding to that very large-scale incident. Then Karen Allen with my office is going to be kind of talking about some of the resources that we have as the PSIC office to help you out, as well as our communications unit training and recognition program. And then we'll have the panel discussion here at the end. So with that, the first thing that we're going to go through with the communications unit overview here is why it's important to have a communications unit, what the role of it, the organizational components and structure of the communications unit, and the need to have that type of comm support during an incident. So, COMLs overall, what do they bring to the table? First and foremost is they do help to improve safety, decrease risk during an incident, because you've got somebody who's there dedicated to improving communications, to making sure that the operations folks can do their job and to facilitate all types of communications on a specific incident or event, whether it's data, voice, etc. It helps to free up command and operational resources, so they're not worried about the comms component. Instead, you have a group specifically dedicated to that. Improving tracking and allocation of resources. Decreasing the burden on the communications center. Many times, and some of our speakers will talk about this today, you have incidents that get developing and get going, but for example, a NASCAR out of PIR, it helps them to be able to have a dedicated comms unit and essentially a dedicated communication center just for that one event. to be able to take the burden off of all the other daily operations that are continuing on. Overall, the COML, or Communications Unit Leader, and I just caught myself doing that. We tend to use a lot of acronyms within the comms world, and so today we put in your packets what we're calling our acronym decoder ring. So if you hear any acronyms that we're using throughout this that you're not familiar with, go ahead and pull that sheet out. And for the folks on the web conference, if you go to our website at azpsic.gov, you can download the acronym decoder ring as well. But this will explain all the different acronyms, what they mean, and kind of what their function or purpose is. But the Communications Unit Leader is responsible for establishing the communications plan for the event, the ICS Form 205. They're responsible for setting up all communications necessary to support operations, and they establish the field communications between incident command and various dispatch. The way they establish interoperability, and interoperability is the ability for incident command to communicate with all of their people to be able to perform their options. Folks across discipline, across jurisdiction can communicate as needed, on demand, as authorized. The COML helps do this through identifying the appropriate radio channels and talk groups, through programming and deploying cache radios, identifying if there are necessary patches or gateways, basically technology devices to bring different talk paths together. Supervising any additional resources. There's a number of people in a communications unit, or can be, depending on what is needed for that particular operation. The COMT, communications technician, radio operators, technical specialists, auxiliary communication staff, those types of folks. The COML is also responsible for mitigating interference. In other words, if there's a problem with your communications during the event, it's the COML's role in working with the COMT and others to find out what the problem is and to get it solved for command. The other value the COML brings, though, is that they're able to understand what the local communication structure is like, what local assets are available to be brought to that resource. Are there resources that other agencies in the area have that they can call upon to help support the operations? They know the frequencies and spectrum challenges that may be based on a particular incident. The topography, where the various system radio tower site locations are, to know if the frequency coverage is going to support the area of operations or not. They're also familiar with state, regional, and local communications plans, and in particular, they should be familiar with the tactical interoperable communications plans. Almost every county in Arizona now, actually, every county in Arizona now has either a draft or finalized tactical interoperable communications plan that kind of details out what those resources are in the counties that they need. They also have a vast wealth of information related to communications plus contacts and resources. And one of the slides later, you'll see Captain Morales always has a notebook with him. And that notebook has contact numbers for almost anybody you can imagine to get any resource you might need for a particular event. The COML have also completed ICS 300, and that's important to note that communication leaders understand the role of NIMS and ICS. They understand the way an operation is supposed to be structured and run, and so they're able to fit within the command structure and support the ops section chief, the logistics chief, and incident commander to be able to perform their jobs. So why do we have a communications unit? First and foremost, it's to make sure that responders because responders require reliable and sustainable communications to perform their duty effectively and safely. This isn't really an issue of incident size, but it's one of complexity. Small-scale events that are very complex and detailed have just as big of a need for a communications unit as a very large-scale, pre-planned event like the Tempe block party, for example. Sometimes more resources are going to be needed, but just like with all things in ICS, it's adaptable, it's flexible. The point of communications unit is to support the operations. So when to order communication support, and this is really a question that you'll be hearing throughout the day-to-day, but the answer is really simple. It's whenever you need it. The basic tenet of ICS under span of control is you order help as you need it, although sometimes it's not going to be obvious. Do you need it for a 3-vehicle crash? Well, there are certain times when you're absolutely going to need a COML to be able to coordinate the different agencies involved in that. If you're having to shut down the freeway, you've got to bring in air support. You have, medical, you have fire, you have DPS involved. That may be the type of incident, particularly if it's longer lasting, where it's good to have a COML. You may not need the full spectrum of radio operators and technical specialists, etc., but having somebody on hand that can quickly respond to and react to any situation, who understands what the air frequencies are going to be used, and who understands that DPS is on a different set of frequencies than Guardian Medical, for example, and who can get that going. So these are kind of some of the questions that we'll be reviewing and talking about today. There are also a number of obstacles that will come up that a COML can help support, or the communications unit as a whole. Primarily, whether it's lots of different jurisdictions, lots of different technology, the COML's role is to help solve those challenges quickly so that the operations can focus on the response. Obviously, the answer to this question of who does the COM unit support is pretty obvious. It supports everyone. Anyone on an incident that needs communications, the COML, the communications unit, is there to support that incident, is there to support those individuals. Right now, we have increasing complexity between radio and data, telephone, video, networking services. We've got public safety broadband network coming up on the horizon. There are a lot of different options for the way information gets communicated during an incident and event. The communications unit, their role is to figure out how to integrate all of those and to make sure that the people who need that information get that information effectively and efficiently. So how is it structured? At the top level, there's the communications unit leader, and again, following ICS principles, it's filled as needed. And in certain events where there's lots of technology that's going to need to be put into place to make everything work, you'll most likely have a communications technician, incident communications center manager, and we'll kind of go through who each of these roles are and what they do here in a minute. Radio operator. Auxiliary communications is your usually your volunteer amateur radio operators. And technical specialist is kind of the catch-all term for the person that knows how to run that particular piece of equipment or machinery or whatever it is. It's a all-encompassing title that's given to everything, whether it's a mobile communications unit, person who specializes in that, or maybe a gateway technical specialist. And obviously, the comms unit can be rather simple or rather complex. This is just kind of a simple organizational chart for a typical type of event, pre-planned smaller event that you might have where you've got a COML, your communications technician or COMT, a couple of radio operators, and a message runner. Message runner, for example, that's one of the things that we fall back on in all of our tactical communications plans. When all else fails, you will always have communication. You just get somebody, write the message, have them run it. It's important not to forget about those. We actually saw a number of events where radio operators message runners were the most effective method of communication between two different units because they were having difficulty with all of their other technology systems. And it allowed the incident to continue quite effectively. So the purpose of the COML, one is to provide for the operational and technical communications needs of the incident or event. The COML provides the oversight and supervision for all of the folks within the communications unit. They're responsible for incident planning, to making sure they understand what the needs of the operation are and that the communications plan is built accordingly. They're responsible. Under NINS ICS, the COML works directly for the logistics section chief. I'll let our experts address that facets of the incident command structure, the ops section chiefs, etc. The COMT provides more technical skills. These are folks that have detailed hands-on knowledge about setting up portable repeaters, gateways, establishing patches, those types of things. They're also responsible for helping the COML to set up the comms plan for a particular event. The COMT can also support whether it's radio, data, telephone lines. These folks are capable of setting up phone networks and computer networks at a moment's notice. Whatever is needed for that particular event or incident. The Incident Communications Center Manager, larger events are going to dictate the need for more people to be involved and the need for more communication. So, oftentimes it's important to have, I'm not a dispatcher, so I'm kind of going from the experience of talking to folks that served in that position. But oftentimes for an event, it's important to get dispatchers there on the ground in the field to run the communications at that particular area and pull it out of the communications center. Oftentimes it's not appropriate to do that. It's better to keep that type of coordination within the dispatch center. One, because that's the home. That's their most familiar point, and pulling people into a new environment can add in new complexity. But the purpose of the Incident Communications Center Manager is if you need that type of structure, and I go back to PIR and the NASCAR event, where they establish their own comm center right there on scene and run that as its own small community for a period of a week there. But the INCM runs that center, supervises the radio operators, and particularly helps to manage the field communications for that particular event or incident. Radio operators, to some degree, this used to be, okay, this was the guy that pushed the button, push the button, release talk, release the listen kind of thing. Now with incidents becoming more and more complex, so this position is also becoming more complex. It's not a trained position per se, but there's an awful lot going on within that position, whether they're tactical dispatch centers, incident dispatchers, etc. Again, I said the technical specialist is the catch-all position. They can be specialists in gateways, communications units, etc. But the key element here is if you need somebody who has specialized technical experience on a particular facet of the communication, that's usually where you'll see a technical specialist filling the role. And then auxiliary comms or your amateur radio operators, particularly useful in catastrophic events. You're trying to communicate, establishing secondary or backup communications paths. Your OxCom folks can help out with that. They're also used often in Arizona as the support personnel for the mobile communications unit. And so you'll be involved with those folks in many counties in Arizona for the deployment of those vehicles. Obviously, a more complex organizational chart. Everything depends on the nature of the event, the size, scope, and complexity of the particular event, on how many folks you may need. So with that,